Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak briefly today. I thank the Government for committing time to this important discussion. There's one or two competing political priorities on the agenda today. This remains a hugely important issue going forward. Perhaps you'd indulge me a second as I seek to take my moment in history today, Madam Deputy Speaker, by perhaps being the first to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Oxbridge, and now Prime Minister, on his appointment to the role, and what was a barnstorming speech outside Number 10 earlier on. And from that speech, I took a number of positives that are related to this debate today. Madam Deputy Speaker, he spoke about his commitment to education, he spoke about his commitment to policing, and he also, as a Member of Parliament for a town like Mansfield, talked about supporting our forgotten towns, and all of those things flirt around the edge of this discussion on our offer for younger people and the support we offer for younger people through things like youth work. So I hope that this too will form a key priority for him in government. Maybe now, maybe now. As Vice Chair of the APPG for Youth Affairs, the issue and the role of sufficiency of youth services is something I've looked at closely over the last year, alongside colleagues from across the House and with the brilliant National Youth Agency. Access to quality youth work and services for young people is fundamental, particularly in areas of significant deprivation like Mansfield and Warsaw. And the reduction in services in recent years is well documented. The APPG for Youth Affairs led a year-long inquiry to understand the role that youth work plays and the impact of recent changes. And we had a brilliant time, to be honest, visiting some fantastic services in different parts of the country. I enjoyed spending some quality time with the Honourable Member for Brighton Kemp Town, and though we probably don't always find total consensus on every issue, perhaps not least the things that I've just said, this is probably one of them where we do, I think, broadly agree, and though we might articulate it in slightly different ways, we'll find out a little bit later on. But my own observation was that it was plain to see the quality and the existence of these services is variable at best, and the contrast between some of the fabulous multi-million-pound My Place centres, for example, that we visited in Mansfield, or brilliant YMCA facilities like we visited in Lincolnshire, contrast with some of the tumble-down scout huts and even minibus-based youth centres in many cases. And even within my own county of Nottinghamshire, the service is hugely varied across the area. My own takeaway informally has been that accessibility and locality of these services is far more important than fancy buildings. If young people can't reach them, then they're wasted. We heard stories at the garage where my honourable friend from Brighton came to visit, connected with the Garibaldi School, about, though it's literally a scout hut on the side of the road and has needed quite significant refurbishment recently, the fact that it is next to the school, the fact that it is local and walkable and people can get there, makes it almost a more positive contributor to that local area, which is a particularly deprived area of my constituency, than the big fancy My Place centre in the middle of town. Personally, I urge government to consider that possibility of linking up school facilities with youth work organisations, qualified youth workers, which need to be separate from school as organisations, but based there or nearby, and those services can be as accessible as possible. I just mentioned at this point the Shed and Vibrant Warsaw as an example of a brilliant example of bringing those services closer to home and into a local community, to Warsaw, which is a small town on the edge of Mansfield that hadn't had any youth services whatsoever until the voluntary sector stepped in and brought those services to the town and to the local estate there, which made them much more accessible, and it's a really positive scheme. In April, the APPT set out clear recommendations on what needs to be done, and the report's detailed. I'd encourage colleagues that haven't had a chance to read it to get hold of a copy. And it found that too many young people don't have the family support or the social networks that they need to adequately support them into adulthood. And youth services can provide an important safety net for young people at risk of going down the wrong path. And for too many, it's the only secure place that offers them that safety and continuity. In the UK, we're lucky to have a proud history of charities and organisations working with young people, from uniform groups like Scouts and Girl Guides to social enterprises and local charities. I've been pleased to see government support, particularly for uniform services and extra funding for those services, as well as, of course, the many positive elements that my honourable friend the Minister mentioned in terms of National Citizen Service. I've met so many brilliant volunteers and youth workers in Mansfield that make a hugely positive impact on young people. I think the importance of youth workers in particular and that intervention was absolutely clear through the inquiry, and brought home to me recently, actually, through a panel discussion with young people organised by the British Youth Council, where we talked about the proactive and preventative approach to youth services, which is so much more effective and cost-effective than kind of crisis management that we find ourselves in so often now. And whether it's the trusted adult who steers a young person away from gangs and violence, or who provides a safe space in the community for activities that forge friendships and skills for young people to get on in life, youth workers literally transform lives, and providing vital early intervention services keeps people out of trouble. Frankly, we have so many discussions about some of the major societal challenges we face, like knife crime, and youth services can have particularly trusted youth workers that forge that connection with young people, can have a huge impact on those issues too. In many areas like Mansfield, we need to do more to support youth services and ensure that especially the most vulnerable young people have access to those youth workers and services. The services can help people feel supported, less isolated, can improve mental health, tackle loneliness, and, as I said, steer children away from gangs and crime. It is a prevention service, and as we heard today in Prime Minister's questions, prevention is better than cure. It's better for individuals, better for families, communities, and for the public purse as well. The loss of youth services can lead to significant costs, social and economic, in later years if young people don't receive support early enough. Through my own role in the Education Select Committee, I know the statistics about how many young people who don't get access to those services in early intervention end up excluded, end up in the criminal justice system, and it's very clear across all of these sectors that prevention is the key. The youth services can play a key role in filling the gap in a more effective and cost-efficient way than needing those expensive crisis services later on. The key recommendation from the APPG report was clear that statutory guidance, defines a minimum and protected level of youth service. I'm pleased that government's initiated a review of that statutory guidance, with the National Youth Agency joining forces with the LGA to lead on government consultation. I know that's due to report later in the year, and it should inform our local choices and local youth partnerships to strengthen those services. And that review on what is a sufficient youth offer is very welcome and much needed. I'm also grateful for the Minister for securing the overdue review and renewal of youth work qualifications, which was discussed, led by the NYA. I appreciate her update in her opening remarks about the progress with the funding for that, which I inquired a few weeks ago in PMQs about. I understood as of a few days ago it was still awaiting that final sign-off, so I don't know if she can confirm that it's entirely done and sorted. She's nodding at me, which is brilliant news, and I know the NYA will be relieved to hear that. But there needs to be a consistent understanding of the level of service or suitable data available to answer the question of whether there is sufficient youth work in any particular area. We don't know how the sectors balance, for example, between private, public and voluntary sectors. It's important to explore these changes that have happened over the last decade and examine exactly what we have in place now before we can decide whether or not that's good enough. The reinstatement of the NYA audit that determined levels of local authority provision would help to start to understand the picture at a national level. The last of these reported back in 2008, and clearly things have changed in terms of our provision and youth work since then. We've witnessed a reduction from 75% to just 25% of the youth workforce holding qualifications in youth work, and graduate and postgraduate youth work have seen nearly a two-thirds drop in new students since the peak. We're now in a position where there aren't enough professionals in the sector, and we need to tackle this issue, as with anything when you're trying to reinvigorate these preventative services or whatever it may be, from recruiting teachers to doctors. The time in terms of training and putting in place qualifications to get people into the sector can be too long. We need to be looking at that now in terms of how we support those qualifications to make sure that if the government does go ahead with plans for something like, for example, what I mentioned before, putting youth workers more closely related to schools, for example, and tying those things together. We need to have the youth workers trained and ready to go to be able to deliver that. So pushing those qualifications, and as I said, the funding for renewal of those qualifications is absolutely vital. I don't want to bang on forever, so before I close... I will.
He's not banging on at all. He's making a very important speech, and I congratulate him on the report. On the question of qualifications and recruitment of youth workers, I completely agree. We need to have well-qualified youth workers. We've lost many of them. Would he support a scheme along the lines of Teach First or Step Up to social work or Frontline, for example, where good graduates are given a fast-track training in youth work and then deployed in some more challenging areas where they can do some really good work, be it around gang violence or be it around troubled families programme and other issues like that. But we need to recruit really good people and then make sure they've got the right skills to be able to do quite a challenging job.
Thank you for his intervention and recognise his commitment to children and young people in particular as former minister. And I know every time I have and I'm involved in a discussion about something like this, he is there and contributing to it, which is very welcome. And I totally agree with him. I think first to secure and renew the qualifications is vitally important, but any way that we can find those interested and aspirational and talented young people who are capable of engaging in this sector, whether they are talented graduates, whether they are those people who are volunteering in youth work right now, who we can perhaps fast track through that system to make sure that we have the right skills and qualifications in place, I think will be very welcome. Before I close, I just want to highlight a couple of local things. Well, one national thing, which is UK Active's proposals around schools, facilities, and trying to open up those facilities in the summer. To make sure that there is a provision for young people over the summer holidays, making sure, I mean, we see spikes in so many social issues over the summer when children aren't engaged in statutory education. To be able to access facilities, a huge proportion of our sports facilities, for example, are locked away behind school gates, evenings, weekends, summer holidays, which is unbelievable, really, when you consider some of the incredible facilities that are available. And I know the Minister has engaged with this before, and I'd urge Government to continue to look and work with UK Active to open that up in terms of youth provision in summer holidays. And I just wanted to mention a local charity, social enterprises, I suppose they are, called Life Skills Education, who run a programme called DARE. And if anybody in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, there's no local colleagues in the chamber, but they will probably, over the last 25 years, have gone through a DARE programme, which when I was younger and I did it at school was about drug and alcohol education. And my dad used to come in on his police motorbike, and we used to all go into the playground. It was all very exciting, and talk about the police and what they did. And it was that early intervention and education in schools, which has been kind of revived in recent years in Nottinghamshire. It's based out of my Mansfield constituency, and they've just had a load of funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner to be able to expand into every school in Nottinghamshire and get in there with that early intervention to deal with things like knife crime and hate crime and the massively expanded curriculum that they now offer in Nottinghamshire schools. So I just wanted to highlight that particular programme to the Minister and perhaps encourage her to come and see it if she gets the opportunity in the future. With the youth work census that looks in detail at what services exist, how they're structured, identifies gaps, with strengthened statutory guidance and a clearer definition of what sufficient levels of youth work actually looks like, we can ensure that youth workers and youth services can meet the needs for young people right across the country. I just thank the Minister for her personal support and interest in youth work in the APPG inquiry. Can I welcome the investment that she spoke of in terms of supporting those qualifications and interventions and the youth charter? And I'd urge the Government currently taking shape, obviously around us this afternoon, to ensure that it does all that it can to support youth work by implementing the youth work census and ensuring that we properly fund these local services.